lucky episode 13, or was last
I
one
think
13?
we're like on 15 or something.
Dang, look out. We have officially been making some... There it is. Welcome back to Wood, Air, and Metal, episode whatever-ish, in the teens. Teen Angst. Episode Teen Angst. That's what we're going with.
Yeah, there we go.
And, yeah, we're back. Adam Keeler sitting over here on this microphone through the Zoom space. Tim Mirth, another lefty.
Oh, yeah.
Another thing. And talking more guitar stuff. A little bit more focused today, at least in theory. That's what I'm going to try to be.
And then he invited me on this show.
Okay. Well, you know, I can be hyper-focused, you know. I need somebody to kind of move things along to different topics. Otherwise, I just keep picking at it.
If we need a topic, I do have a topic.
Oh, you do have a topic?
I should have said that before, but...
Well, we'll totally use your topic, but let's totally start with this, because we were talking about the guitar serial killers last time, and Charles Manson actually played guitar. And if I remember right, because I watched this, I listened to this podcast called Unexplained, which is, you know, it's got the UFO Sasquatch thing going on just for entertainment, but other times he talks about historical figures, and one of them was Charles Manson, and he definitely was like a singer-songwriter trying to quote-unquote make it for a while.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah, but clearly he had some mental issues, to put it lightly with that.
Which is very uncommon for musicians.
Yeah, that never happens. Never happens. Like, we're the most sane people on the planet.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, anyways, they have a guitar in Tennessee. I guess it's on display in the museum. It's a classical, of course. Great. What does that say about me? Of course, I don't like the Beatles, and apparently...
Glad we're not in the same room, yeah.
Yeah. That's why we're doing it during Zoom. It has nothing to do with... It has everything to do with Charles Manson owned a classical guitar. And apparently he was friends with the drummer from the Beach Boys, Dennis Wilson. Yeah. They all said he was creepy, obviously. And then, yeah.
Wait, Dennis said Charles was creepy?
Yep.
You know, I wonder if he said that at the time or if he said it after the fact.
Well, I don't know. Who knows? Probably at the fact, because he seemed like a pretty weird dude. Like, everything that I heard on that Unexplained podcast. It's like, yeah, this guy was definitely into the whole hippie drug culture scene, but way further out there than anybody else was at the time. I mean, he thought, yeah, there it was. Yeah, he thought that Helter Skelter was a coded message about a race war. Oh, okay. There we go. So he's got that going for him. He also thought he was God's gift for music. There we go.
Huh.
Yeah, so semi-delusional? Just a bit?
How do you know it wasn't about that?
I have no idea what the hell Helter Skelter was about. Lovers, but no dancers. That's the only lyric to the song that I remember. I don't know. But someone like Manson just becoming friends with a major magician like that just seems crazy. But that's what happened. Yeah. Wow. He was like really hanging out with Wilson for a while.
Yeah, like I said, did he really think that guy was crazy, or?
Huh. And that wasn't Wilson's comment on him. That was
okay.
Somebody else's. Yeah, I didn't make that clear. Sorry.
That's all good. Interesting. You know, it's kind of, when you said that, did you ever watch the show The Patriot? Did I ever get you to watch that on Amazon Prime?
No.
Oh, man. It might be about my favorite show that I've ever watched in a while. There's only 2 seasons, and they actually canceled it. Because it was one of those shows, like, it was perfect, but all the people on it got into other stuff, and then they took, like, 5 years to make the next season, and then now it's like, okay, it's too much work to get everybody together. And it has nothing to do with the Patriot movie. It's about this guy who's like a secret agent or whatever, like for the government, and he's just super depressed, and he's smoking pot and stuff, and he's a folk singer too, and he always sings about his missions, and like, and his dad happens to be like the government guy that is his boss or whatever. So he's always like a secret spy, like always, you know, pretending to be somebody. And he's like, man, you got to stop singing about the missions. Because that's like his only way, that's like his coping mechanism for the things he's doing. He's like,
Well,
yeah, he's like, I accidentally killed the guy in the hotel today. I thought he was the bad guy, but he was just folding sheets or whatever, you know. And it's like he's like giving away all this
that sounds
information.
like that show would be
Oh,
right
it's
up my.
so good. It's simultaneously the most depressing and funniest show you've ever seen.
Kind of like BoJack Horseman. Have you seen?
In a totally different way than BoJack.
Okay, BoJack is like
BoJack's a little more like slapstick. This is more like I don't want to say it's slapstick, but I think you know what I mean. It's like
yeah,
some of
it's
it's
a little.
intentionally like humorous. This is not that it's not intentionally humorous, but it's much more like subtle humor, I guess I should say. Um, but then what's funny too is he actually this isn't giving away too much. He has to take on this new role in the first episode or whatever, where he has to pretend to be this mechanical engineer for this firm because they travel to this one, I can't remember what country it was, normally, which is a normally kind of a hard place to travel to without getting all kinds of special privileges and stuff. So he couldn't just go there, whatever. So he had to like infiltrate. So he had to do a job interview to be a mechanical engineer for this pipeline company thing or whatever. And he didn't really know that much about it. So he's real smart, but he's not particularly motivated because he's so down. I don't know. It's just kind of funny, like the whole. And at some point, he like basically, without giving too much away, he's sitting there at the urinal, like during the interview, and this one guy comes in who's real chatty, and he's like, "Man, I'm gonna level with you." He's like, "I'm a spy for the government, and I'm gonna need your urine for this this drug test." And he's like, it's for national importance, you know. Like it's just, like the whole thing is it's amazing, amazing show. And the dad from the '70s show, is the boss of the mechanical engineering firm.
Okay.
And he like hates him. He hates this guy.
Yeah, I think that guy gets cast as.
Oh yeah, he's so good.
Oh,
It's so good. Anyway, but it's always funny because every episode there's like a song that he wrote that's like becomes part of the episode.
Okay, I gotta check that out. Just hearing that, how it was like mostly depressed, singing about his missions.
Oh yeah, and it also there's one last tidbit. I think it's the last episode of season 1 has the greatest 5-minute scene that's ever been in any TV show ever, and I won't tell you what it is, but you'll know when you see it. I mean, you'll just be like, I can't believe they pulled this off.
Okay,
it's amazing, amazing show. Highly recommended. I recommend it to somebody that I work with, and they're like, it's a slow burn because it takes a little time. You got to give it some time to like. But if you're in the right mood and you like dark humor and those kind of things, you'll get it.
I definitely enjoy the dark humor.
And there's guitar in it, so it wasn't too off the beaten path. Here we go.
Like what I just finished Solar Opposites season 2.
I don't even know what that is.
Solar Opposites is like another comedy cartoon by the guys that do Rick and Morty.
Okay.
And then like these aliens escape their planet that's doomed, and they go to take over the Earth, and it's just they crash land, but they're like stuck, and they have to. It's really funny, like totally funny, and completely self-aware, which is the thing that makes it like they have no problem with fourth wall stuff or meta jokes like the Rick and Morty, and it's basically Rick and Morty with different characters. It got like the most absurd adventures that they can possibly think of that they do. One of the characters likes to shrink people, like regular people. If they piss him off, he'll shrink them and put them in his like what they call the wall, which is like this ant thing of colony. And he's got like hundreds of people in there. They formed their own society and everything else. It's like the subplot that's going on through the whole thing, and it's really funny. There's no guitars though, so I don't know how that applies. But back to guitar stuff.
Sure.
So what's your topic?
What's my what? Oh, what's my topic? We're already that. That's how limited we are. I just posted about it too because I was thinking about it. This, actually, I'm kind of curious your take on it too. But my post was basically like, if you're a musician and you're not learning stuff off of records, so to speak. I say records, but I mean recordings.
Yeah, I get it.
you're like missing out on one of the greatest joys slash rewards you could get as a musician, and kind of highlighting that I know it's like it's a tricky thing to do at first. It's really hard. But even like the thing is, it's like it's almost like when you read a autobiography. Like I think we might have talked about this once, but I love autobiographies,
Yeah.
even though I know they're not always accurate, because it's like you're living inside that person's head for a little while, right? It's almost like the biography might be factual about the person and tell you all the truth stuff for the most part. But the autobiography really paints the picture of what that person is. But you kind of have to read between the lines. Like, oh, they're probably not telling the truth about that. Did they really do that? Maybe not, but that's just part of their character, right? That's like getting to know them. And I feel like that's the same thing that happens when you listen to records and you try to learn some of it. And I don't mean like writing it all down and doing the whole like analysis thing. I just mean putting a record on, playing along with it, picking out pieces of it. You might stop it if there's something cool you want to check out.
Mm-hmm.
And like a little line or something you want to learn. Or you want to learn the whole thing or whatever. You really get to, I feel like it's almost like you're saying like, hey, nice to meet you. What's going on? It's good. It's almost like an autobiography. And even if all you can get is that first little hello, all you can get is one note. You're like, that was a D. I know that was a D. Like if you, when you first start, that's kind of where you're at. You're like, I knew that was a D. I got that one. Maybe you missed the next 30 notes. But it's like, hey, that's like saying, hey, I'm Tim. You're Bob. I really like your stuff. It's cool to meet you. It's like that. You're like getting to say hello. Anyway, and like I do it all the time. I don't know how many people do it. I know a lot of people don't do it. And then I know a lot of like jazz musicians, it's a big thing to be like transcribing. It's like part of the rite of passage, which it's hard to do jazz if you don't do that. But a lot of times that becomes like a very like, I don't want to say it's tedious, but it becomes like a scholastic thing you do where you write the whole thing down and you do the full analysis and you do all these things. And that's a lot of work to do that. So I'm not quite referring to that, even though that has great value. It's more of the just getting little nuggets of what's going on. So for instance, in the last couple of days, actually I grabbed Tom Quayle thing came up, and I remember I was like, oh, I never really like learned any Tom Quayle like anything. Like what's his deal? So actually, you can't really see it here, but I kind of like wrote this line that I thought sounded cool down. And I was like, oh, that's what he did. That's the little thing. That's his little like, because there's this sort of like Tom Quayle thing I always hear him do. Anytime I hear his solos, like there's little like tendencies that he has.
Yeah.
And that's sort of what you learn. Like I'm like, oh, what is that tendency? I was just curious at the moment, and I just figured it out. And then like there was a Billy Gibbons thing that was playing, and like I was like, oh, Billy Gibbons has these like cool little like the way he does vibrato or whatever, and the little bends he does. You can't really write it down. It doesn't have much value. Like, what are you gonna do? Like, D vibrato line, like that doesn't help you very much. You're like, oh, it bends down at the end or something. It doesn't tell you how he does vibrato. Like, how do you get that sound? How do you get that feel? In all these kind of things. So I don't know. So I guess I put that out in the Facebook world too, and I've already it's getting like people commenting on it and all that stuff. And anyway, I just thought it was interesting. And I did that. I've been on like a big Coltrane kick the last couple of days.
Oh, yeah, that's all you talk about lately, which is fine. It's not a knock. I'm just saying,
I'm such a, I hadn't listened to much. I didn't really listen to much Coltrane in the last like 6 months or so, because I've been trying to get this Red Side Visible thing done, and I'm just trying to stay focused in like the more metal-y sort of world and not get distracted by something else. And because I'm very easily like, oh, what's that? What's that over there? I can just get all over the place. And so I was really trying to stay focused. But now that that's done and I don't have to think about it like that anymore, I started letting myself listen again, and it's like I hear all the. It's gonna sound bad, but I hear so many guitar players and stuff, and it's like there's just like no comparison in my head between basically any guitar player. I can't think of anybody that it was so deep as that guy, man. It's just like it's like listening to I don't know. It's like when you listen. I don't even know how to. I'm trying to think of a good comparison, but it's like bar talk or something too. You know, it's like when you're in the right frame of mind, like it's so deep. There's so much information and so much good stuff and like emotions and Shostakovich and some of these people or all the great composers, right? You listen to Bach or something, like you really get in the frame of mind where you're just like, whoa, how deep is all this stuff? And that's how I feel about Coltrane too. It's just like, man, like
Yeah,
like did you get a hit in the head? So anyway, but when I listen, sometimes I just listen and enjoy it and just go off into wherever that takes you. But then I am curious about how he does stuff. So there's little like things he was doing that I was like, how would you pull that off on guitar? You know? So I was sort of like learning some Coltraneisms, especially like so around the late 50s, early 60s is his sort of they call it sheets of sound period.
Okay.
And so there's like these just washes of like lots of notes. Mm-hmm. And it's like it's more amazing than like any guitar player you ever hear playing like fast stuff. Like just it's really interesting, and there's like endless amounts of variations in it. It's never like the same variation. He's always changing and always evolving. Like during the entire solo, it's always variations of it. So if the first time it was triplets, then now it's or not triplets, like it's like groups of 3. Now it's groups of 5, and now it's groups of 7, and now it's groups of 6, 3, 5, 7. You know, it's like all these different like variations of the whole thing. Like it's like endless amount of possibilities. That's why it's so deep. You're like, man, how does he have all this stuff so readily available? But anyway, I was just kind of like, oh, how would you do it? And it really took like. I'm not going to show you here because I'm embarrassed, but it's things that could be applied to guitar, but not done. Like guitar players are really good at staying in sort of like a position or going this way. But when you start mixing the two together, we get a little bit uncomfortable. Like if we stay on 1 or 2 strings, it's okay. But when you start, like, if you have to think like from here up to here in this sort of like endless sort of thing, we're not very good at it really. It's just easier to stay. It's easier to stay here. Yeah.
No, I just want to interject. I'm not sure what you mean by that.
Okay. So like it's easy for us to stay in position.
That much I got. And then when you were
it's easy for us to go up a string, right? I mean, in a sense, it might not be fast, but we can really think this way. But when we start going like it gets a little bit trickier. And then there's like say you wanted to do so he'll do like these, but it's 10 million times faster than that. And it doesn't really sound right because the way he articulates it is not like that. It's like you kind of have to like mix going side to side and up and down at the same time in these sort of interesting ways to sort of make that thing work the way he's making it work. And in the way he's phrasing, it might be 4 notes that if you did it and went to a different string, it loses the right character. So you have to do 4 notes on the same string or 5 notes on the same string to get the right like sonic signature to it.
Yeah, I mean, we do that not that I'm saying like we're doing it to imitate Coltrane or anything like that, but when we're doing stuff with contrapuntal lines classically, that's exactly the decisions that we'll make. Like
Yeah.
we'll keep like something particularly on, or at least myself. Well, not just myself. I know a lot of other guys that do this. If there's one particular line that we can maintain on the same string through the entire thing, we'll do that for that reason, to keep the timbre the exact,
Right.
the exact. Even though it's like it might be next to nothing in terms of a difference between that, but it's still subtler because you're going to the string and you can hear that difference, or whatever, or vice versa. Like going up to you could play the E there, but you really want it here because of the thickness of that particular tone and that particular motif, like
Right.
versus it's three different within that versus one. So I get that decision. Like I don't think I've ever considered that when I've been improvising in any way, shape, or form. But in terms of like classically, it's like, oh yeah, all the time.
Yeah, I noticed things too, like yeah, definitely. I mean, like when you're playing the blues and stuff like that, you have to really think about those. Like, well, I could play the C here, or I could kind of like, like I could go, but it's better in a lot of ways for what I was trying to do, at least. To go back here to get to that. These little like things you have to make decisions about, and that's like what I was talking about with like learning stuff off of records too. It's like some people really get stuck into what notes is he playing or what chord is it exactly, and you write it all down and you put it on a piece of paper, but that almost has like limited value. When you're first starting, it has value because you don't really understand theory that much. So you're like, oh, that's kind of interesting that he used an A on an F chord, But like eventually, you're like, well, that's just the third. I know what that sound is. You kind of get why these certain choices are made, or oh, that was the sharp 11 or something. You're like, okay, so they're using like a Lydian kind of thing, or you start to think you can kind of do that without having to write that down. I mean, but it also, the problem with the writing it down is it doesn't always, like in guitars are really interesting this way. It is all those little nuances, or even jazz, I guess, really. But it's like, how did they play that note? I know it just says C, but was it, or what? Like, how did you get to that note?
Exactly. Yep.
There's so many little things. Did you play it back here, or did you play it here? And I know we've tried to write a lot of different ways to spell these out, but we're not. There's even in guitar music, like classical music, where it is really well spelled out, it's not really well, it's not spelled out enough. There's a lot of room for interpretation. So when you're trying to mimic and that's the reason why Christopher Parkening sounds different than John Williams, it sounds different than Sharon Esben, that sounds different. Even if they played it exactly the same tempo, they're going to sound different because of the little nuances that they do. So if you really wanted to, like, well, I really love the way that John Williams did it, but I don't really like the way Christopher Parkening did it or something, or it's not my favorite, then it would do you good to actually listen to John and try to mimic it, right? Like, how did he do that thing? I'm just picking on a name, but it's all those little things. So same thing happens when you're like, I'm like, I hear Coltrane and then I think, well, like, how does that apply to a guitar? And like, what are the little things you'd have to do? So, there's learning that stuff and that kind of language. And sometimes it's less about the notes, but more about the vibe, if that makes sense.
No, I mean, that makes complete sense to me.
Yeah.
And to just like take the original statement of doing stuff by ear, it's been a long time since I'm functionally done that. Like intentionally sat down. It's like I'm gonna, outside of when I'm teaching. Like if a student's like, "Hey, can you show me the song?" It's like, "Sure."
Yeah.
It's like, "Oh yeah, this is it."
Right.
Whatever. It's like it just takes 2 seconds and I'm done with it. So I haven't sat down and like done any line. I used to all the time. Like, the first 10 Satch albums or whatever, it would be like buy the album on CDs, come home, put it in the CD player, listen to it, sit there with my electric guitar and try and figure out exactly what the guy was doing.
Yeah.
I never wrote it out, but I would at least do it by ear.
Sure.
Parents would dread those days. It's just like, oh great, the new Satch album or whatever album's out. Louis Adams going to be sitting in his room cranking out the tunes, and playing the guitar. And I think that's an incredibly valuable tool. Like it has to be. That's the only way that you're going to get your ear to be physically attached to your fingers.
Definitely.
That's you just have to train it that way. There's ear
I think
training.
it's just fun too. Like,
oh yeah, I mean the secret. I love this quote from Michael Hedges that he's like, the secret of discovery is extremely sweet.
yeah,
Yeah,
sure.
it is. There's nothing like hitting that right note where it's like, ha, there it is. That's what he's doing.
Right.
And maybe
I'm often surprised too. Like sometimes you hear the craziest thing, and you think, man, what the heck is that? And then you go and figure it out, and you go, huh? And it's something really simple.
yeah,
And you're
Yep.
like, oh, okay, like, huh? So if you just change that one little thing, then it does that. That's kind of neat. So you learn these little like tricks or whatever too. And that's what I mean about personality too. It's like you're not just learning that that person's a good player or something like that. You're learning the things they figured out, the things they discovered. You're learning like about their like personality and maybe their sense of humor or no sense of humor. Like are they the type of person that can put a little joke in their playing, so to speak? Or are they the type of person that's like everything's very serious? And those are just really interesting. Like it's almost like reading an autobiography. Like you learn about these little intricacies about them.
Well, I think it's fundamentally that's what it is. You're getting a live autobiography.
Yeah.
I mean, granted, if it's a live show, but even on a record, it's like it's a recorded autobiography. They're telling you their story just through notes in a different different format. And it's extraordinarily useful for everybody to just be like, okay, we're just gonna. This is how you learn it. If you like certain things, you dive in, and you start to figure them out by ear, and you do it that way. It's like
I'll go ahead.
I will put one little thing on that. One little thing, and this clearly doesn't apply across the board, but it's something that I noticed. And now, granted, this is anecdotal because it was only like one particular student of mine who was a phenomenal student. So I'm not knocking his playing. Honestly, like I'm not knocking his playing at all. Like he was fantastic. I wish he would have stayed with it because he's one of those guys that I would have like forced to go like, you need to get a master's degree in this. You have it. You got it. You got the discipline and the ability. Keep going. And he wanted to do the Sakura variations. I forget the composer right now, but it was this Oriental piece that John Williams played, and he saw John Williams play it, and he wanted to learn to do it. And it's got like 5 variations to it. Very accessible piece. Like it's not super hard. Yeah. So I was like, sure, let's dive into it. But get the music, like get the actual score, no tabs. Like that's the one thing tabs, just the actual score. And so he did. He got the music and he sat down and he learned it. And the first couple of weeks he was playing it, I was like, "Are you doing this by ear? Like, are you just watching John Williams and then kind of like imitating it?" And he's like, "Yes." And I'm like, "Okay, I can tell you how you can tell. The first way I can tell is that you have no idea where you are in terms of timing, like none. Like the pulse was kind of there, but he wasn't owning the pulse. It was clearly imitative. Yeah, it's just something that I could detect with this. It was just like you don't know where you are on the beat. You're playing the notes fine and everything else, but you're not in the pocket. You're not on top of something on this particular beat, and that's what I'm going to do with it. It's more like this is what happens next, so I'm just going to play it. And that was one of the things that I observed with. And he was like, "Yeah, that's kind of what I've been doing." I'm like, "Good. Stop hitting the play button. Start getting into the score with the metronome, and work out so you know where it's at." Because there's a couple of gestures in there, where it goes by really quick, and it's just like I can't even do it on this thing, but. Like some 30-second note grouping that was there, and I'm like, "You're not doing the 30-second notes." Like I can tell you're just playing fast and hoping that you kind of like get all the notes out there, but not knowing that it's 3/8 notes worth of 30-second notes for that particular gesture. It switches every other 8th note, and that's where you have to do it. And there was this lack of clarity with it. So
it's interesting that because it's funny because I've always noticed the opposite is that the people that they get stuck in the score, like have no sense of time,
Oh yeah, no, it can go both ways.
Where
You're
like the people that I know, because I know, I mean, like on guitar, right? It's pretty normalized, especially in the rock world. No one reads music.
Mhm.
And a lot of them can't even read tab. But a lot of people learn stuff by ear, and usually those people have like the best pocket. But if you
Yep.
tell them to play a G chord, they're like, I don't know what that is, you know. And you're like, but you just played a Meshuggah riff, you know, and you were like playing it for real. And they're like, yeah, but I don't know what a G chord is. You're like, okay, well, I can work with this because at least you have a good sense of time because they're so used to like listening and being in like the space with it. But I could see what you're saying. Like if he just like figured out some line because he like heard it by ear and then whatever the mechanism was to figure out how to play that, he compartmentalized it in a way that it was like, all right, play that thing now back into the
Yeah,
groove.
and
Yeah,
that was what was going on. There wasn't an underlying sense of pulse. It's like it's quick, but it's not like quick for the sake of quick. It's serving. It's literally written out. There's an
yeah,
intention behind it, and he's using this as a offense. It was basically an effect of a pika, the Chinese instrument or whichever that I don't know how many strings it is, but
yeah.
where they do like that quasi tremolo thing on it, and that's what this guy was putting onto the guitar. And I'm like, well, you're kind of getting it, but it's definitely intentional. How many notes are there? It's not just, oh my God, here we go, brrr, fast, and then I'm out. It's like, no,
Yeah, right.
there's a limit to that. And so I mean, it's interesting though, because we both came up to the same uh, issue in terms of timing from two different angles. Like I was like, this guy's just imitating what he's hearing, and he doesn't have an underlying sense of pulse. And you're like, well, there's other people that are completely in the score and have no sense of pulse.
Right.
So, and that both of those things are absolutely correct. They're
Yeah,
not.
right. No, no, no. I agree with that. Yeah, I think we might have talked about it a little bit last week, if I'm remembering right. But one of the issues of today's players is that we sort of talked about how they all kind of sound the same, and a lot of that is because it's so easy to get the right information, where or you just, how do I play this song? Well, here's exactly the way that Richie Blackmore played it or whatever, and watch me and I'll show you how to do it. And then you can watch that and you can learn exactly how Richie Blackmore did it. But if you were at home just with a tape player, you'd probably come up with your own little way of doing it that was probably on the wrong strings, or whatever. And like maybe he tuned in D and you were still in E, and but you did it in a different location, or whatever the little idiosyncrasies were. You got the general vibe of it, but you did it a different way, which sort of became your thing. Like it became one of your little staples that made you sound unique, because it wasn't quite right, it wasn't exactly right, but it was sort of right.
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting. I
But
think
I want to.
oh, go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah.
I don't have anything necessarily to pin on exactly what you're saying now, but one of the things that I just wanted to kind of focus on for a second was that what do you think is that underlying problem of somebody that's learning it by ear and watching it and imitating it and not getting the pulse, and the guy is coming at it from just the score and having no sense of the time with that? Like there's clearly an issue with the timing thing that spans both approaches. What do you think that potential issue is, and how I can tell you how I solved it with this kid that was doing the imitative thing. But before I do that, I want to hear your thoughts on it. I don't want to poison the well, so to speak.
Yeah, no, it's. I'm gonna try to separate um, groove-based music and classical music, because I think there's a difference.
I would argue no, but all right, let's do that.
I'm gonna because maybe it's more like a folk versus. I don't want to. I don't really like the term folk tends to get like a negative connotation, like it's simple. But when you're playing in bands or playing with other people in group settings, and there's a drummer in particular, that's a skill set that you grow up in. That like if when my kids were playing, if they play with me ever, we're like sitting around just jamming, you know, and they can get a sense of the pulse. And if all they can do is they can't play any notes, but all they can do is go,
Yep, like the Victor Wooten starting thing.
you know, if all they can do is that, or just, you know, they start to get like a sense of, you know, of things, right? So like it's almost like I'm gonna say groove based music, like it's like that's the entryway into blues and rock and jazz and all these kind of things. Like that's that, or at least that should be the way you enter those things, is coming from that space. I say should's kind of a weird word, but that,
Yeah, no, I get it.
where often in classical music that's not where it starts, and it's certainly not where teachers start most of the time, because especially like beginner early teachers, and some of that has to do with the fact that those teachers don't have a very good sense of time as it is, or they just never, it was never something they were taught, because I don't, it's like somewhere that like I don't believe that Mozart started with his dad just going, hey, 1 2 3 4 1 2, like, you know, like let's do it, yeah, 1 2, like my kids know all about 2 and 4. You know, if they know nothing, not much else, they know about 2 and 4, right?
You only laugh on 2 and 4. Don't make hair.
But it's not because I'm like a hardcore believer, like it has to be on 2 and 4, but just so they can start to think about it, like to start to think, okay, well, why does this sound this way? Like a lot of it has to do with those kind of like, where's the accent and those kind of things, and not always just thinking. Like it gets them to, I can see that it gets them like in a different thinking space than just saying, let's count 1 2 3 4 1 2. Like they lose something when they do that. But when I say 1 2 3 4 1 2, you know, they get, okay, they can kind of like, oh, there's a little groove in that. Like they can kind of feel it, you know. It's an interesting thing to witness. All that aside, back to your question. And we can get back to whether these are different or not. I think a lot of times what happens in classical music is the notes come first, the harmony and the melody comes first. And really, I mean, let's just say European music, it sort of started in dance, but at some point it you know, when we think of classical music, it doesn't necessarily correlate with dance. And so when people were learning classical guitar pieces, we'll really try to hone in on, I'm going to try to bring it in, is they look at the score and they don't think, oh, this is a bossa nova. So, well, what's a bossa nova sound like? What's the groove? They're thinking, oh, the first chord is a G, a D, you know, whatever the thing is, they're honing right into the notes and forgetting that it's a groove, like, and it takes a good teacher or whatever to be like, yo,
yeah, no,
like, hey, what did you? I know you played the notes, but like, you did not play the song, you know. Like, let's start from beginning. You're not, for the next week, I don't want you to play any notes at all. All you're gonna do is listen to bossa novas, and you're gonna mimic it for the next week, and I don't give a crap anything else. You're not doing anything. Don't you dare play a scale. Don't you do any of this. Like, go learn what this is, because this will serve you for the rest of your life. And then we'll come back to the song where you know what this feels like. And part of the problem there is so many classical pieces don't even tell you that, right? They don't even tell you like what groove it's supposed to be or whatever. So then it's like, okay, well, even if you play like to the metronome, you're probably not playing it right.
Exactly.
So there's that whole like little aspect. So then that's why I was saying, I could totally see what you were getting at though, where it's easy to sort of like learn a line, or not, I say easy. It's not easy. It takes a lot of skill to learn a line off a record that's complicated, or to learn, you know, no one does that like day one. It's going to take you years of practicing, like figuring out, oh wait, was that a G or an F or whatever, you know, like you're kind of like trying to figure it out. So I could imagine if most of the song was kind of easy, you know, and then all of a sudden there's this crazy line that you had to come up with some like mechanical way of dealing with it. And I think this happens in the score too, where you're like, hey, everything's cool. Oh crap, this one's like, I gotta do this thing, and then I gotta do this thing, and then like, how the heck am I gonna do that? So you start just practicing doing this a million times, and then now when you get into the song, when that happens, it's like, okay, everything's grooving, and then, oh, that's right, I got to do this thing. You know, you like compartmentalize it and switch to some other gear to deal with it. But I guess at the same time, it's like, well, that's not a big deal as long as you know that that happens. Like, you got to say, all right, at some point, I got to turn this thing to like sit in the pocket with the rest of the piece, because right now it just, I'm kind of hitting it, but you know, I can do it, but I don't fit. So I got to figure out how to keep that feel the whole time, and that's tricky. I mean, that's not a trivial thing to do, depending on how hard that part is or whatever. So you know, it's I'm gonna let you talk in a second.
Yeah.
Is Kurt Rosenwinkel has a hypothesis on all this, which is he's really thought about. You could tell he really thought about it. You know, like, how do you get good time? And he believes, or at least this thing I read, and hopefully I'm not totally misspeaking for him, is it's technique that is the reason people have bad time. It's
How so?
Because it's like that moment where you're going, okay, everything's fine. Oh, now I got to do this hard thing. And now your timing gets all off because your technique's not good enough to keep up. So what he does with his students is he's like really works hard on technique, so that technique's never the burden, never gets in the way of good timing. And even like, he's like, the reason you're not on the metronome is because your technique's not good enough. You can either slow it down or whatever, or you need to like figure out how to go faster, because as soon as it gets to a certain tempo, the reason that you're not in it is because your technique's falling apart.
Yeah, totally.
I think it's kind of interesting to think about, you know.
Well, it's
I'll let you go.
No, you're fine. That sounds like what I often will comment on students with some stuff. I'm like, well, you got the notes, but it was like falling down the stairs and landing on your feet. There's clearly better ways to get down the stairs that are a little bit less conducive to injury and more pleasant at the end. Yeah, but right. You made it. Like, you got the notes and you hit the end. And
why are you talking about me like that, Adam? Come on now.
That's everybody, including myself. But it's one of my favorite analogies, my atomisms or whatever, when I'm teaching. So I get I agree with what Kurt's saying. I mean, it's whatever will trip you up, you will encounter. It's as simple as that. Like, if
you think in improv too, right? It's like, if you're being a good improviser, you're trying stuff that you haven't worked out necessarily.
Yep.
Like, because you're like, oh, I wonder what that sound like, you know, or I have an idea. I think that I want it to sound like this. And you're like, but I've never really tried it before. You have to have the guts to just do it anyway. That's part of the magic of it. But it's okay if it's a little sloppy too, in a way. Like, the sloppiness is really not the reason your timing gets weird. Like, that's okay, in a sense. So it's like, there's a little bit of whatever, but like, the more technique you have, the more likely you're not going to get like tripped up on a finger or something, and all of a sudden you're behind the beat, and then you're trying to catch back up, so now you're ahead of the beat, and like, it doesn't get all weird.
And that, I think, like, with the improvisational aspect of it, is that the more that you are technically able to execute things proficiently, the less chance of you having to, you'll jump over the hurdles without even noticing it. Right. Like, it won't even occur. But if you're particularly weak in some aspects, and that happens to be what you're going for subconsciously in the middle of a line or whatever, all of a sudden that'll become blatantly apparent because your well, in this case, hands, will be like, yeah, no, dude, we can't really do that to the
Right.
level that you want to right now, and you get exposed. I think in one sense, classical pushes you harder on those aspects because you don't get the choice. Like you get the improvisational, and I'm not saying everybody does this improvising, but clearly it's advantageous to play to your strengths when you're doing some things. In classical music, to an extent, if you're picking certain pieces, you're either going to have the technique for those pieces or you're not. It's like you have to work up to certain. I remember this is a Bogdanovich jazz sonatine I was working on, and I got the first and the third movements set and playable, and I worked on the second for a while. But the third movement had this one leap with the pinky that was just. It wasn't far, but it was just so unbelievably weird with the chord that you were doing.
Yeah.
It was, and there was no other solution. Like I took it to my teacher, and I was like, Steve, am I reading this wrong? Like, how the hell? There's got to be an easier solution to this.
Right.
Because, like, the piece is hard, but then it just spikes for one freaking note, and then just drops down back to where it was. And it's like, yeah, there's just no other way to do it. Like, you have to play it in that position. That's the only way to get to the and keep the voice leading going and everything else. Not particularly the voice leading, but keep the idea that he was doing. And it was heavily groove based music. It's Doosan, and it was fast and aggressive. That's why I loved it. And then so you had this hurdle that you had to make sure that you like all I did was practice that spot for hours. Like one little blip that if you sneeze, miss it in the performance, but it was just that was the linchpin, that was the crux of the piece in order to get it going. So when I'm teaching students on technical things, I'm like, listen, your goal is to take the valleys and the mountains and smooth everything out. Like there should be nothing where you hit it and you start to slow down because it's too hard, and you don't want everything that's easy to you're just going to speed up and put the gas on through that. It has to be even. And so I'm a real technique fiend when I get somebody that's strict classical. It's like, okay, we are doing here's studies, here's exercises, here's this. We got to keep your hands loose in order to be able to execute things. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to play. So I think that Kurt's absolutely right in the technique aspect being the hurdle for timing, because that is the one thing that if you can't do it, you're going to trip. That's just it.
It's interesting to think about. I mean, obviously we know like metronome and these kind of things are important, and really important.
Yes, and so I think
there's another aspect to that, but it's a very valid point that your hands can easily get in the way of good timing.
But that's the other thing too, is I think the reason why some score-based things are so metronomic in terms of playing, like it's less groove, more this is when it comes in. And this is the thing that I caution students with as well. I'm like, okay, so it says like quarter note at 80 or whatever. Let's just take that. That's great. You get the quarter note going at 80, you're playing it at 80 beats a minute, but you're slapping me in the face on every single downbeat. Like every single beat that comes in with the metronome is like, there it is. I clearly practiced with the metronome all the time, which isn't a fault, but I often will encourage them. I'm like, all right, if you can handle it at tempo, just obviously for an example, at 80, why not try playing it with the metronome set to 40? So you don't hear every downbeat. You hear every other downbeat. You get a bigger sense of the pulse.
True.
With that. Getting it down to 20 would be like, that's pretty much impossible. Yeah. That's way too low. But, or maybe not. It's a goal worth shooting for. I think I read a paper where they said like 30 beats a minute is like the slowest somebody can.
That forum that Brandon and I met on, we had there was like a pseudo competition kind of thingy once. I don't even know. It might have been made up, but it was like the slowest metronome usage, And it's like, Jimmy got to 34 beats per minute, like, all right, here comes the ringer. He's going for 31 beats per minute, or whatever it was. It's like surprisingly it's like so hard. Yeah, right.
Yeah, it gets real. Like you figure you slow it down. It's like no.
And there was some jazz guy too. I remember. I don't know if it was Mike Moreno or some. It was somebody like that. It's like he liked to set it at like the lowest it would go, which was like it was either like 33 or it was like 24 or something, just to see in practice, like for 10 minutes a day, how close could you get to that? Like, can you internalize whatever that thing is and be on the metronome? It's really tricky.
And it's a great exercise. And this
Yeah.
kind of like piggybacks on to Benjamin Zander, the conductor of the Boston Philharmonic. He gave a speech, a TED talk. You can look it up online. It's like the transformative power of classical music. But he starts it out by playing. Oh God, I'm drawing a blank on the piece. Well, regardless, he starts out by playing the piece, and he's just like every note is like hammeringly loud. Da 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 da. Like really, really loud. And then he's
Yeah.
like, that's your beginner. And then he was like, here's after 1 year. Here's after 2 years. Here's after 3 years.
Oh, that's
After
cool.
4 years. And he's like, after 6 years, after 7, and then after 8 years, and he's like, it's 7. You can tell that they're getting just about like to the musicality is finally coming all together. He's like, and that's when they quit. And he's like, but they just would have stuck with it for one more year, dum da 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 da, and he plays it like beautifully. He's like, they get the underlying sense of time and pulse and phrasing, and all the musicality comes out. And I think that's exactly what might be lacking in the metronome instruction, is that there's a tendency to get too reliant on the absolute beat rather than the longer ones.
Yeah.
And that's why I always,
Oh,
well, it's like, let's not, as much, if I'm doing technical exercises of running scales, then I had the metronome all set at an even click. Click, 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 same volume,
Yeah.
same tempo. That. If I'm doing something with music, though, I'll be setting that so it's a click, 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 click,
Sure.
giving the accents. And that really helps with students that are having an overcommitment to the downbeats because of the metronome.
Sure.
And then that what's that app, Time Guru app, which is phenomenal, and I wish they had a plugin for a DAW for it. It would be amazing. Shameless plug for please make that happen. That random off, what the hell is it thing called, where it'll take the notes.
Right. It has a metronome, and it basically randomly takes away some of the beats.
Yeah, so you don't hear them,
Yeah.
which is great. And you can turn that up and down. It's like a gradually turn it off. So it could be like 80% of the time it won't play a beat, or 30% of the time it won't play a particular beat. It's absolutely phenomenal tool. I'm just like, I'd keep it. Go buy this app. It's $2. Go buy the app. Buy this app. Amazing. It's absolutely worth the money. And things like that can start to establish a deeper sense of pulse and internalization of the beat. Which also it flowers, spring illusion, whatever. It comes out when you drop into a groove. Even with classical, there should be a groove with it. I mean,
Yeah.
if you're playing Bach and you're static with it, you're not playing the dance movements. And it's like I'm sitting here now after a decade of classical training and playing. And it's like I look back at my previous performances, like, holy cow, I played like I had a stick up my butt the whole time. It's like I was so concerned about the notes. It's like,
sure.
no, oh my god. And then now it's like and I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but my technique has progressed to a point where it's like, all right, now I can just play the music.
Sure.
And that's kind of the point with that. So I think ultimately, like from both sides of the fence, whether it's the score related thing and no groove, or listening to it and imitating it, the underlying thing that both of those things are missing is internalization of the pulse.
Yes, I think so.
I think like that's both of them are missing that particular thing.
I guess it depends too. Like if the person who's listening and learning, no matter how good you are with a metronome, you're never gonna get Coltrane's time and his time feel from a metronome. You're just not.
Yeah, it's just not gonna happen.
You have to play along with him. You have to learn to mimic that feel, and there's no book or anything you could ever read that will ever tell you how to do it. You just have to listen and learn. So there's that aspect of it. So it's like, in one sense, that pulse you're talking about, you can only learn from listening.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of a funny thing. I don't know.
Well, I look at it like, in order to get to that spot, and this is the other thing, is that you have to be able to get the crap kicked out of you.
Certainly.
You have to, it's like the Captain America, I can do this all day type of thing when he
Right.
before the super serum, it's like, and that's the point is like the first times you start to do anything like this, you're just going to get demolished. Like there is some gradient of natural sense of time. That's clearly there. But everybody needs a metronome and a backing band to kick their butt into the right thing.
Sure.
Eventually, like that's just the way that it is. And then you can go into things like listening to the Coltrane for your example.
Yeah,
And
you at least need some foundation to know that that's a triplet, and these are kind of like you need those sort of foundational. Maybe you have a different word for it if you came up with your own language, but you need to like at some point compartmentalize all those things so that you can actually use those words, those rhythmic words, as real things, right?
Yep. It reminds me kind of what Jack Chance taught me when I was taking some of the jazz stuff from him. He's like, first you learn the head stuff, then you practice the physical stuff, and then you let your ears and your heart take over when you're actually doing the soloing.
Yeah.
Like you have to drill it so that, and from all that evolutionary psych stuff that I've been reading, it's like that's literally how we process stuff. Like when we're first encountering, everything in the front's lit up, as we're gathering new information, and then as we drill it, the brain signature, quote unquote, starts to shrink, and it doesn't occupy as much as our frontal cortex. It gets smaller and smaller, and then it just moves further back in the brain, and it's compartmentalized, and it's back there. And, okay, so I can pull that out just like that. When I need to. So I think that's something that needs to happen with Pulse, and that requires practice, and it can't be separate from learning things by ear or from the score. It's got to be something that you do through. And I think the technical exercises really help with that. Like they really.
Oh, certainly, yeah.
It's kind of like
they're like time savers in a way. Like you.
Yeah.
It's like a good teacher can save you like 3 years because they show you something. You're like, oh, if I would have figured that on my own, that would have taken me forever. Yeah.
Exactly. That's also why I sign up for the occasional lesson from like different teachers just to kick my own butt.
Same deal.
I haven't mastered as much as I'm in a teaching position at a collegiate level and whatever the heck that's worth. The fundamental thing is like I'm not that cocky most of the time that I can't learn from somebody else, like regardless of what they're doing. Like I'm always picking out new information, be like, oh, it's a good idea. It's like, and incorporating it with that. You don't want to limit yourself to yourself. You gotta be humble enough in the right way of like knowing where your ability is, knowing what you can pull off, and knowing where you want to go, and then picking the person that can get you there and doing it.
Back to my boy Coltrane is so 1960 or so. He was already a big name at this point in the jazz world, and Giant Steps was basically coming out and all these kind of things. So he was becoming like a person. He brought Eric Dolphy into his band, and Eric's unbelievable. If you're not familiar with Eric Dolphy, he's like crazy good musician. Played saxophone, played bass clarinet, played flute, and like just mind-blowingly good at all of them. Very like they now like classical saxophone pieces, they take transcribed Eric Dolphy solos. Like that's part of like the repertoire. That's like
nice.
That's like canon now for the classical saxophone. Anyway, I'm sure he was a fan of Eric. But Eric's take on it, and Eric died very young. Eric died before Coltrane, and he was younger than Coltrane. So he was just total monster. But Eric's was like, yeah, Coltrane just like asked me questions all the day, like all day. Coltrane's already like he's been in Miles Davis's band. He's a big name. He's like the greatest tenor sax player alive. Blah blah blah. Like that's his reputation. And here he brought this guy in his band because he perceived what Eric was doing and he didn't know how to do any of it. So he had the most popular band maybe in jazz, brings this guy in and says, hey, be in my band so I can pick your brain for the next 2 years, And he did. Like you'd be like, man, how do you do this? Like, show me this thing, show me that thing, show me. So here's the greatest, whatever. saying, hey, I'm not the greatest. I'm gonna bring somebody who I think's got stuff that I don't have. So,
Well,
and you hear about that. Like there's those stories like all the time, like bringing those kind of people in their groups of great musicians or whatever. Even if they're not getting lessons, like they're sort of they're like paying for lessons by putting people in
anytime,
their groups. Yeah,
well, I just said like anytime you play with other people, like if you're
yeah.
serious about what you're doing, you're always learning. Like you're
I mean,
always being.
they say especially in jazz, like be the worst person in the band. You want to be the worst person because then you actually learn some stuff.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And that's the great thing about it. I mean, at least that I think at the level where we're at in terms of intensity of learning, that's something that'll never go away. It's like
Sure.
we're all like, oh, look at that over there. That guy did this. I'm totally gonna take that. I'm stealing that lick or I'm stealing that
Yeah.
idea, and that's just what you do. You have to get your catalog so diverse, and it's also like it provides a continual sense of challenge for me. Like I love the
Yeah.
sense of maybe that's why I'm
Sure.
more classical. Not that improvising isn't challenging, but it's like I want to be able to scale that mountain or whatever. Don't shake your head at me. So
That's go
it's
so easy. It's all written out for you. Gosh, anybody could do that. Like a computer could do that.
there it is. Shots fired. But no, in all seriousness, it's like this constant influx of information from other players, which is so great because you can take it and just run with it and do your own thing with it. I mean, that's the point. It's just
Yeah.
like I'm going to learn these things and then put my own. I remember reading an interview with Satch where he was talking about getting lessons from a jazz guy. This was after like his 8th album or something like that, just to kind of keep opening up more of those doors of his own
Right.
playing. And it'd be fascinating to see it just for my own curiosity to see like that lesson, to see somebody as like a jazz grade be teaching Joe Satriani his particular things, and that would
Do you know Alex Skolnick?
yeah, yep,
He went to New School
yeah, and then he's
after
now
Testament and became a jazz, like into jazz stuff or whatever. And it's funny because all the people in the class were like, "Dude, how are you in my class?" Like I thought you were like a big rock star, or whatever. And he just wanted to learn. I think that's pretty cool.
well, it's like the guys from Radiohead went back and got PhDs in music.
All right.
They just wanted to learn more. So kudos to them. I think it's awesome because they're like, yeah, I can do this at Oxford and it's going to cost a lot, but whatever for me. That's like yesterday's royalties or whatever.
Well, like you were saying, like learning, like, so I did some Coltrane stuff and Billy Gibbons and Tom Quayle, and there was a Steve Morris thing that I kind of picked up. Like there was this chromatic sort of thing he does. Then he kind of like moves it around, or kind of thing or whatever. That I kind of like picked up and it was just like in a blurb. I just like saw a thing and I was like, oh, okay. So then he does this sort of thing, and I'm sort of paraphrasing what he did. Anyway, I'm kind of trying to go back to like, but I was also listening to like Bach and is it Satie? How do you say Satie? Satie. And I was like learning those pieces, like, because it was on, and I was sitting listening to music, and I had the guitar near me, and I was like, oh, what is that? So it was like, I couldn't tell you what it was now, but it was like, even that, like, it's like, oh, that's the thing that they're doing, or Debussy or something's on. And it's not, to me, it's not just about, like, it's like, again, it's like learning a little bit about that person and like their little tendencies. Like, oh, that's that harmony. I never really knew what that was. I kind of thought it was this minor thing with this like thing, but now I see it's actually like whatever, whatever it is, and you kind of get these little nuggets of truth, and it's fascinating. It's just fun.
Yeah.
And a lot of it doesn't I can't tell you exactly what the Sadie thing I learned was, but it'll come out in I'll hear it come out in my playing like 3 months from now, like I'll do something and be like, oh, that was that thing. Like it's my brain's like just like processing it back in the background.
Yeah.
And then it comes out into your playing later. And those are the kind of little things. That's why I do it. Like it's like, oh, there's like some little bend or some little thing, and you kind of like your brain takes, at least me, it takes me forever. Like I'm like slow and steady wins the race. Like it takes my brain forever to like process this stuff. I'm not a quick study on that. I feel like I'm just relentless. And And
What do
then,
you
but it
mean?
then eventually comes, and it's like 6 months later, you're like, hey, when did that get into my playing? And you kind of forget, like, well, 6 months earlier, I was listening to some Taylor Swift, and she did this little thing, and I pulled that off of her. You're like, oh, okay, well, that's that. I mean, it could be anything. Like that's why I think it's fun about it. Like everybody offers something interesting to learn. Um, I don't know. At least to me. I wanted to say, you were talking about the metronome time things and just time feel and all that stuff earlier, and it reminded me of a conversation that I was in earlier this week where there's an improviser, Cecil Alexander, really good jazz guitar player, and he does this thing sometimes where he kind of like he's playing in time, but he's like sort of floating at the same time, if that makes sense. So there's this. It's one of those where people can feel like they're in time, but if you were to put like put it in a grid, you would say, well, that's not in time. It's off the grid. But why does it sound right? So it reminded me. So this person proposed the question, who's also a fabulous guitar player, had posed the question like, well, how does Cecil think of this? And it reminded me that I always think about three different things when it comes to time feel. So here's a teaching opportunity, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But there's three, and this particularly goes with jazz, I guess, but it could be for anything. So there's sort of the way that most people think about time feel is that sort of grid, like, so let's say it's a 16th note pulse grid, and you basically have to be in line with anything within that pulse, but it's very regimented. It's very like stick to the lines, don't veer off. You have snap to the grid, snap to the grid sort of thing, right? And so you sort of take this much time and you divide it exactly equal, and it's always the same for the next 10 minutes or whatever, however long the song is. It doesn't change. So that's one aspect of thinking about time. But then there's another aspect, and one of those is the distance between the notes.
Mm-hmm.
So imagine, if you will, like, if you had to, how good is your time? Like, if you start a phrase, to maintain the same distance between the notes regardless of anything else that's going on. So to try to highlight what I mean more specifically, say the drummer was playing at 97 beats per minute, but you started your line at 100 beats per minute because that's what the first two notes told you. Could you maintain the 100 beats per minute even if they were at 97 beats per minute? Like, did you, ignoring what the drummer did, your control over that distance between those notes is so strong that it doesn't matter what anyone else is doing. Not saying this is not something you do on a gig because you're gonna get fired, but as in terms of a practice, it's about understanding that I started a line and I want it to hold this time for the next however long this phrase is. And that's different than the grid thing, because the grid thing is like the whole piece is fitting in this nice neat package, right? And then this is, well, I'm interjecting a line on top of this other thing maybe, or it doesn't exist, but I'm going to be able to maintain whatever I started my pace at. So it's almost like if you were talking and you were trying to keep staying in some kind of pulse when you're talking the whole time, but not slowing down as you're talking to try to match what everyone else is doing or something. Like you're gonna hold your path, so to speak. So that's a sort of an interesting conceptually to think about. What would that mean? Like understanding, can I play something and have that be the same? And then the third concept is, and I'm ignoring like swing and all those things because swing could be applied to any of these, which is so there's harmonic time.
Yeah.
So that's the time from the chord change to the next chord change. So let's say you're going from a C major chord to an F major chord, and then to a C major chord to an F major chord, right? And it takes 0.673 milliseconds to go from the C major to the F major, then 0.67 milliseconds to go from that to I'm picking a very specific time just to be specific. So you always, so it's like, here's the chord change, here's the chord change, here's the chord change, and it's very specific. You know, it's on the grid. That part's on the grid. But in between that time, if you have you can play anything as long as you make the change at exactly the right time when you're supposed to. So if that meant it was way out of time, but like you change the chord at the right time, it's gonna work. Like there's like a weird psychological thing. So it's kind of like if you had your toddler sitting there, and you're holding the chords down, and they're going like, you know, and you change the chords to something else. You might maintain the like every 4 beats. I'm changing this chord to something else. Whatever it is, but if you could maintain this to be always right on, you know, the first beat of every 4 beats or whatever, then what you play in that space in between,
you're getting quiet again.
I probably hit this. Is that better?
Mm-mm.
Interesting. It looks like it's good over here.
Yeah, you suddenly got really quiet.
No, you can't hear me?
No, I can hear you, but you're quiet.
Interesting. Any better?
Nope.
Better?
That's worse.
Oh, awesome. Huh. It's showing up on my thing, I think.
Maybe.
Let me kill the phantom. How about now?
It's still quiet.
Huh. I wonder what happened. I can't really tell.
It happened right after you used the guitar. I don't think your guitar hit anything. Maybe it's just like a gain compensation thing.
Any better now?
Yes.
Huh. I don't know what's going on with this mic. But anyway.
I think it's probably the cable.
I know this is a different cable than last time, I think. Anyway. So yeah, so that's the concept of like harmonic time. And so it's kind of like, so as a test, you should try making something that's chordal so you can actually hear it, but see like what kind of weird, like almost like if you could have like a MIDI thing or something where it changes the chord, but then you put some random rhythm like, and just do it, but let the chords change when they're supposed to, you know, and see what you get out of it. And what's interesting is if you do that, you'll hear the song, like your brain will accept those rhythms because the harmonic time's on the right pulse. So it's kind of an interesting like thought process. So I think too, like sometimes when players, even like Coltrane or Zappa and Steve Vai, maybe Steve Vai is an exception, but and Holdsworth and stuff, when they do those things that are like 11/3, like they probably for sure, I don't think Holdsworth worked that out.
Oh yeah,
like
yeah.
He didn't say like, okay, dun, 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 you know, like I don't think he actually worked that out, but he felt it. He felt what 11/3 felt like, and because he hit the harmonic rhythm right, it sounds so good. Like it sounds right.
Well, it's like when Steve Vai's doing that whole machine gun thing for the Love of God, machine gunning it. You know,
yeah.
Like I was just looking at the score the other day because I'm still interested in doing some type of an arrangement of it. But I was looking at it and I'm just like, there is no way this guy does this the same way every single time.
Right.
You know, it's precise as the written out thing is. You know, I'm just like, God, the ear on the guy that transcribed it. It's just phenomenal. I think it was actually him that did it. You know, and it's the transcription is absolutely precise, but I've seen probably 100 different live versions, and they are never the same.
No, sure.
The rest is, but that isn't. And I'm not clearly not knocking his playing with that, but I think that he's doing exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, there's it's like a feel thing, and it still feels good. It probably feels good in all those live shows too.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's like he's still nailing, and it's still fast and hard as hell to pull off.
Yeah,
but he's hitting those harmonic changes right on the side, right. Boom, when it changes, and so it sounds like it's cohesive. Because I was looking at it, it's like, okay, sextuple, septuple, eighth notes, sevenths, and I'm like, there's just no way. He's like, I'm gonna do these, and it's no. I mean, he could, if he ever comes onto our podcast, he can sit down and correct me. And he's like, no, that's exactly what I wanted to do.
What was it, Zappa, when he brought Vi into his group? There was a joke. He was like, this kid, because Vi had transcribed these solos or whatever. And he's like, this kid's making me look like a genius, like, because he's putting this like 7/3 or whatever, like all these polyrhythm things. And he's like, my impression from what Frank was saying was like, that's not the way he was thinking about it. He wasn't like trying to do that, but he was feeling that thing. But Vi like took it literally. It's almost like, have you ever seen a blues solo transcribed and written out exactly for what it is, like with the swing not like implied but actually written out? Because it'll be like 7/4, but it was really like an eighth note sort of thing or something, but like but because it was like technically it really did start here, if you were to be like really picky about it. Like if you wanted a computer to play it back and the timing to line up, they had to do these like funny things to make it right.
Stuff or something where it's like really 30-second notes in the space of this.
Yeah, right. It's like those kind of things. You're like, wow, this person's a genius. They like it sounds so good.
And I'm serious.
Oops.
What was that?
Siri caught me. Like as soon as I said serious, the Siri thing clicked on.
Oh, nice. I'm serious.
That was probably really, like I said Siri 6 times after that. Oh, that's right. I said the H word, hey, and then the S word, and then it picked it up like that. Okay, I'm like, how the hell did they do that? That was weird. I'm like, what the hell?
You can tell I don't have Apple stuff because I don't know what she sounds like.
I never use her on my computer. My phone all the time. On the computer, it's like never. Anyways, so with that type of thing, the harmonic, the space for timing becomes much, much more lenient if you can grab the bigger groups.
Yeah, with the it's again a conceptual sort of thing to experiment with and learn about. So it doesn't always. It's kind of one of those like, well, does it always have to be in the grid? So that harmonic time could shift. Maybe it's 4 beats, or maybe it's 1 beat. So now if it's just 1 beat, and obviously it's all relative anyway. But let's say instead of being every 3 seconds, now it's every half a second. You could still get away with a lot in that half a second, as long as you hit the important strong beats or whatever.
It's kind of when I teach my beginning improvising thing, I'm like, as long as you're landing on the notes of the chord when you're done, it's not going to sound terrible.
Right.
It's going to sound like you meant it, And at that point, if you're on stage, smile. Sure. Make it look like you're damn right. That's exactly where I wanted to go, even though you were just kind of like, ah.
Well, and if it's in the pocket, no one will care at all. Even if it's totally wrong. Mm-hmm. Did you ever hear that Pat Metheny lesson that goes around?
No.
Oh man, you got to look it up on YouTube. You can find it on YouTube. I know you can. Basically, Pat Metheny does like this masterclass lesson or whatever, and this kid plays for him, and he sounds like you're sort of, I'm gonna say typical like college, junior or sophomore or whatever, guitar player, jazz guitar player, and like Metheny like craps all over this kid's time, and it's pretty. It's like in one respect, like the kid plays okay, but you can tell like next to Pat, like his time's really not that great. Pat Metheny is like really known for great sense of time. And he's just talking about how you have to use the metronome and like, no, it's like triplets. It's not really like 16th notes or whatever, like, and all these kind of things. But there's a couple examples that Pat gives, and he's like, man, he's like, if you're in the pocket, like, you can play anything, and he kind of proves it. He's like, look, I am just playing. He puts the metronome on and he plays this like chromatic scale, and he's like, if you're in the pocket, it sounds like the hippest crap you've ever heard in your life. Like, it sounds so hip because you're there, like you're in it, and it's kind of it's pretty awesome little like 25-minute whatever thing to listen to. But it's cool to hear, like, in one sense you're like, Pat's like probably overly harsh, but that was when he was a little bit younger and more like vocal about those things, I think. And he's just like, yeah, man, your time's just not happening. He's like, forget all the harmonic stuff, like you don't have any, you're not ready for that, like you need to get this time thing going, like it doesn't matter all that other hip stuff you think you're playing or the right notes, none of that matters, like get the time sorted.
Yeah, no, and that's when I was Adam Rodgers at University. Well, were you in that master class?
I went to it. I wasn't in school anymore at that point.
But yeah, he gave a master class, and I played in it. Because
I didn't go to the classical one. I went to the jazz one.
Okay. So this is what happened in the classical one. I played, and another guy played, and I got lucky in the sense that he loved the BWV 998. It's like one of his favorite pieces, and I played that. So it worked out really well. It was like, hey, all right, let's dive into it and talk about different things. I don't remember a whole lot of what he said regarding my performance in that. I mean, I'm pretty sure it was genius, but it was a while ago. But the thing that does stick out about
I couldn't remember it because he was like, he crapped on it so bad. No.
Yeah, exactly. I think I went home and cried myself to sleep.
Yeah.
But the other guy that played. I think it was Danza Brasileira. One of the Jorge Morel's pieces. I'm pretty sure. Either way, it was a bossa nova groove, and the guy technically, the kid was phenomenal, as a player, but he had absolutely no sense of groove, like none. It was dry as dry could freaking be, and he was from Brazil. Well, I'm kind of pseudo-identifying him, with the 17 people that were in the class or whatever. Either way, he was from that area, and one of the things that Adam said to him that caused like a lot of people to be like, "Oh no." Was he's like, if you were from Brazil, you'd understand what the rhythm is. So we're all like, no, he didn't. He did. Oh, snap. Because that was one of the things that we like that the professor at the time was always harping on him about. He's like, you can get all the notes, but you ain't got no groove. Like every single time, it's like you can play this incredibly technical music, but you have no groove. And then that happened with Adam Rodgers, and it was like, oh snap. that changes
did he ever sort it out?
From what I have heard from other players, yes. Once he went on to his doctorate, somebody kicked his butt and got it in, which is great because he was a phenomenal player. So that was the only thing that was kind of like lacking in one sense. It was like rhythmically he was precise, but it was like you could just turn on a MIDI file and get the same results.
Yeah, I think like that's the thing with the metronome too, is like you can't just play it like, so there's like a lot of phases to it. First there's the phase of you got to learn how to, like, if you were clapping with it, that you basically can't hear the metronome because you're so dead on that the metronome disappears, right? So like you have to learn how to like find the center of it and always have it. So that's one aspect, but that's just one of it. Then you got to learn, once you feel like you're comfortable understanding that, you got to learn, well, how do I go a little bit before, but always consistently the same distance before? And then how do I go a little bit after the click, and always consistently after? And then how do I, then it's like, okay, well, you could do that now go after the first beat, but right on the second beat, and then after the first, right on the second. So there's these little like intricacies you have to learn, because the groove, like you said, like if you put a computer on, it doesn't sound right. Like the computer is perfect. It's way more perfect than any of us will ever be. But it doesn't groove. Why doesn't it groove? Because it it's about those little intricacies and feeling like, because you want to, like, sometimes you have to like be behind the beat to get that little pulse thing happening.
Yeah.
And you don't get it otherwise. And that not every beat, not every note that you play has the same rules applied to it. So one might be slightly before and the other ones are right on or slightly ahead. And that's how you get these like, this like sort of like shifting like feel, like it kind of like this little warble thing that happens. Which is all very fast. It's a really fascinating thing to think about. Anyway.
Yeah, it's
so
like
you have to kind of work those things up, and it just takes time.
Oh yeah, I remember a buddy of mine was friends with Pink's drummer, and he also did stuff with STP or not Stone Temple Pilots. What was it after Stone Temple Pilots? Velvet Revolver? Was that it?
Oh yeah, right.
Something where he was playing with Scott Weiland. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that he said, he's like, he always had a metronome going in his ear, like all the time. Phenomenal drummer, constant metronome, no matter what was going on. And he's like, you know, he shared a story about how Scott was like, yeah, do you mind speeding things up with this song? Like, you wanted it faster. He's like, I didn't speed it up. I just I played ahead of the beat. That's it. He's like, I literally would just land in front of the beat just a little bit. And all of a sudden, he's like, yeah, that's exactly what I'm going for. And then boom, you know, I don't think Scott was a bad musician, you know, in that sense of he didn't know the difference. I think it would be able to tell.
No, he just used different words probably to mean something, you know.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You know, either way, but that I'm just kind of piggybacking on your point of if you can do slight adjustments with the pulse is there as the pillars, but you can play. You don't have to always be on it. You can play it around with it, and that creates the illusion of moving ahead and pulling back, even though you're not doing it. I was just teaching that with it's Allegro Ma, which is like one of the quintessential super classical piece that everybody wants to play. And there's a quick little run of straight eighth notes that most people play totally straight. And he's like, I really just want to speed up there. And I'm like, sell me on it. I'm like, if you want to do that and play that faster, show me that it can still relate to everything else that's going on rhythmically. And I don't care if you take it faster, but sell me on the point. Like, don't just like play it quick. So all of a sudden I have this disjointed partial scale run and then it's back to the normal pulse. You know, I'm like, start thinking of it this way rather than thinking of it as like straight eighth notes with that particular passage. What about looking at it like you have a 2 dotted half notes? And as long as you're coming in the next dotted half note at the right time, it's going to sound like you're selling it. But if you land on it early or you land on it a little bit late, all of a sudden you're going to lose that underlying pulse that's happening. And it doesn't sound like you did it intentionally. It sounds like you just put your foot to the metal and hope that you got there.
Right.
So, and that's a great exercise to do stuff like that. And again, it's back to metronome and getting bigger and bigger pulses. You know, I often will say, like, if I'm learning something new that's technically demanding, the first thing that I'll do is go through with the metronome at 40 beats a minute to the smallest note division that's on the page. So if it's the 16th notes, it's like an hour long to play like a 4-minute piece or whatever.
Yeah.
But that it really allows me to, one, get a good grip on where everything's at. And I'm hearing the rhythmic aspects of it with that, you know, and then I slowly start speeding that up till I get to 100 beats a minute. Then I drop it down to 50 and do it as an eighth note and then work that up to 100.
Sure.
Down to it.
And that's a good practice for sure.
I mean, it takes forever. But let me tell you, if I need to learn a piece like that, that's exactly what I do.
You slowed it down enough that it lets you learn, which is great. Yeah.
Yep. And then, but again, once I get to a certain pulse with that at the quarter note, I start to get even bigger. Like if I can get to a half note or somewhat of a even division of the beat and slowing it down, I'll do that in order to keep the bigger sense of time and the phrasing with that. It makes phrases come alive. You know,
definitely. I know. Well, I was gonna say there's 2 points I was thinking of. I'll start with the one with Joe Lovano. Do you know Joe Lovano?
Yeah.
He's like a legend sax player. He's actually from Cleveland. Still alive. Anyway, there's this cool masterclass where he's talking about where he clicks his foot. You know, he's a jazz. So he's like, sometimes he's like, I'll be like right on the beat. And he's like, I phrase a certain way when I have that pulse. And then sometimes I'll just play on the 2. And sometimes I just play on the 3, and then sometimes I'll play whole notes, and then maybe there'll be 2 whole notes, but it's all the same groove is going on underneath. But now he's changing the pulse for himself as an improviser to say, okay, well now that's a one, that's the pulse he's on now, and it makes him phrase differently.
Yeah,
and he was kind of demonstrating how it changes phrasing, and it's good to sort of play with that, So sometimes you do one kind of, okay, here's the pulse, or maybe here's the pulse, or maybe the pulse is here. Like, so what does that do to your phrasing? And it makes you more interesting to listen to by switching it up. And then another one I was thinking of earlier was, some people make their identity where they land on the metronome too. Like Tony Williams and Elvin Jones are 2 of the biggest names in jazz drumming ever. Tony is like notoriously in front of the beat, and there's just like this energy that comes with it. And it's awesome. Like, it's just like he's such an amazing drummer. But same with Elvin. Elvin's like behind the beat all the time. And there's like such a different vibe, and both of those guys are just like, they're monsters. But their pocket's so big, but at the same time they're coming at it sort of from a different place. So you can kind of almost put your spin on your vibe and your sound or whatever, not just by that, but like that could be one of your things. Like you might feel behind the beat more than you do like right on it or whatever, and that is part of the vibe that you're doing, And it's interesting to think about those kind of things. Like, can you play a piece ahead of the beat, and can you play behind the beat, and can you play right on the beat or whatever? And then which do you like the best? Or maybe you like part A on this way and part B on this way, and those kind of little shifts. So, man, this is all about time, this episode.
Yeah, it seems that we got into the metronome thing, and we had a lot to say about that, but that's good.
Yeah.
That's good. On a topic that we really dove into. And I mean, I still think we're scratching the surface. There's so much more.
Oh, I know, right?
Go into it. It's like we just kind of like skipped a little bit about, and that's that. But that's kind of the point. So clearly, if you take anything from today's little podcast, get a metronome and get on it. Learn how to use that thing as a tool, not just something to sit there and slap you left about the face as your timing, but it really can be used to get into the intricacies and to fix your own internal pulse, get a broader sense of pulse, be able to play against it, play with it. It's just endless, And if you spend months, maybe even years getting on top of it, it'll pay off with everything that you do. It becomes that you'll be that guy, the rhythmically correct guy, for sure.
Yeah, and I guess one to sort of hone in on what you just said too, I think, is the primary purpose of a metronome is as a pulse. Like it's a time tool. It's not to get your technique faster, which a lot of guitar players do, right? They're like, okay, I learned this at 100, now I'm going to go to 105, now I'm going to go to 110, now I'm going to... but they're not really using it for timing practicing. They're using it to like improve their technique, which is the least important thing the metronome does. That's like the time's like the most valuable thing. Like if you learn, just put it on 80 beats per minute and just hang out there for like 2 weeks, and really trying to hone in on just feeling it, and like it's not too much information. Like, can you like be in it and be on the pulse, and can you play against it and play with it and all that stuff? It makes a big difference.
That's the big thing is, can you play against it and then go back with it? Can you switch that back and forth? That's honestly, that's one of the last pieces that I have my beginner students play, does that a little bit. Not against the metronome, but it goes from an straight eighth notes to a triplet, and that transition. And that's, I tell them, like, first lesson, I don't care how quick you play. I care if you can keep it in time. That's it. As long as the quarter note stays the quarter note, I'm good. You can do it at 40 beats a minute. I don't care. But I want it to be even. I don't want you to speeding up and slowing down. And so the last piece is this thing called the Spanish study in the node book, or the goal piece of the semester. And it has a transition right in the middle of it where it goes from straight eighth notes to a triplet. And I'm like, you got to nail the transition between the two. Got it. I want that under, and that's kind of like the proof is in the pudding, so to speak, of that they have that underlying pulse. Because if you can keep that steady, not speed up or slow down, you know, you know, as you can nail that, you're good. That's totally fine in my book. And most of them, pretty much, I haven't had one person not hit it. You know, with that, it looks a lot more intimidating than it is on the page. You know, you look at the students first look at it, they're like, "Oh my god!" I'm like, "Don't be scared of the amount of black on the page. Never be scared about the amount of black on the page, and never get cocky with the amount of white on a page. Because just because there's not a whole lot of notes doesn't mean that it's easy. Sure. So it's one of those things. Either way, just don't get cocky. Just do it. just do it. Anyways, all right. Cool. Well, that was a good one.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody, for listening. And we will see you all next week.